Have you ever bought something and thought, did this used to be bigger? It probably was. But the price? That stayed the same, or even gone up. This sneaky trick is called shrinkflation, and companies are using it more than ever to make you pay the same or more for less.
From the rising costs of inflation to the growing trend of shrinkflation, even when prices are not going up, consumers are getting less bang for their buck.
Your bag of chips has more air, your cereal box holds fewer ounces, and even your deodorant stick is smaller than last year. Companies don't advertise these changes. They hope you won't notice.
They're advertising as if, hey, you're going to get this great value.
And it's not.
The packaging looks the same, but what's inside keeps shrinking. Shrinkflation has been around for decades, but it's getting worse. Businesses blame it on rising costs, supply chain issues, and inflation. But let's be real, it's about keeping profits high. Instead of raising prices outright, they just give you less. So how did shrinkflation start? How bad has it gotten? And what can you do to avoid getting tricked? Shrinkflation isn't new. Every time costs rise, whether due to inflation, supply chain disruptions, or higher wages, companies look for ways to make products seem the same while giving you less. One of the earliest examples dates back to the 1970s when inflation was hitting hard in the US. Instead of raising prices, companies quietly made products smaller. Candy bars, bags of flour, and soft drinks all lost ounces, but their packaging stayed the same. Fast forward to the 2008 financial crisis, and shrinkflation made another big comeback. Companies kept the same size packaging but put less inside. A bag of coffee that was 16 ounces might quietly drop to 14 ounces, but the bag still looked full. Now in the 2000s and 20s, shrinkflation is worse than ever. With global inflation pushing up costs, companies are using every trick in the book. But this time, consumers are catching on. Social media is filled with side-by-side comparisons, exposing just how much products have shrunk. Shrinkflation is sneaky. You might not notice right away, but when you compare today's products with past versions, the differences are shocking. A classic example is Cadbury cream eggs. A multi-pack used to have 10 eggs. Now it only has 8, but the price hasn't dropped. If anything, it has gone up. Cereal lovers have also been affected. A box of Kellogg's Frosted Flakes that once weighed 500 grams now weighs just 450 grams. The packaging remains the same, but the contents have been reduced. Sports drinks have also quietly shrunk. Gatorade bottles, which used to hold 32 ounces, now contain only 28 ounces. The company cleverly redesigned the bottle to make it look full, so most consumers don't notice. Similarly, Lay's potato chips have suffered a major size reduction. A family-sized bag that used to be 13 ounces is now only 10 ounces. That's 3 ounces of missing chips, replaced with extra air. Household products are not immune to shrinkflation either. Bounty paper towels, once containing 165 sheets per roll, now have only 140. That means consumers have to buy them more often, ultimately spending more. Tide laundry detergent bottles have also shrunk, dropping from 100 ounces to 92 ounces, while the price has remained unchanged. Perhaps one of the worst examples comes from Brute deodorant. The stick became smaller, yet the unit price per gram doubled, meaning consumers are paying significantly more for less product. Chocolate bars have also been affected. Snickers bars, which weighed 58 grams in 2012, are now just 48 grams. Even Toblerone found a sneaky way to cut down on chocolate. Instead of making their bars shorter, they increased the spacing between the chocolate peaks, reducing the amount of chocolate while keeping the bar's length the same. Companies rely on the fact that most consumers won't notice these changes unless they compare old and new products side by side. This allows them to increase profits without openly raising prices. Shrinkflation isn't just an annoyance, it's costing people more money. When a product shrinks but keeps the same price, consumers end up paying more per unit without realizing it. For families on a budget, this is especially frustrating. A box of cereal that once lasted a week may now only last 5 days. A bag of chips that used to provide multiple servings is now gone after just a few snacks. Over time, households are forced to buy these products more often, increasing their expenses. One of the biggest problems with shrinkflation is the deception behind it. If a company raises prices, consumers can at least make an informed decision. But when they quietly reduce the size of a product, most people don't realize it until it's too late. That feeling of being tricked is what makes consumers so frustrated. Brand loyalty is also being affected. Many shoppers who have purchased the same snacks, drinks, or household products for years are now switching to store brands or bulk buying to get better value. Others are using products more sparingly, such as tearing paper towels in half or cutting back on snack purchases altogether. The worst part? Shrinkflation isn't going away. Unless companies face more backlash, they'll continue to find ways to cut costs without lowering prices. Whenever companies are confronted about shrinkflation, they all offer the same excuse: rising costs. They blame inflation, supply chain disruptions, or higher wages. While there is some truth to these claims, many consumers are skeptical. Businesses claim they have two choices: raise prices or shrink products. They argue that making items smaller instead of more expensive helps consumers avoid sticker shock. For example, food manufacturers point out that the costs of wheat, sugar, and dairy have increased. Rather than charging more for a box of cereal or chocolate, they reduce the size. The same reasoning applies to household goods. Companies claim that rising fuel and packaging costs force them to make products smaller. The problem is that when costs stabilize, these products rarely return to their original sizes. Once a company successfully shrinks a product, it almost never makes it larger again. Instead, they continue to cut corners while keeping their profits high. Shrinkflation works best when people don't notice. That's why companies use misleading labels like new and improved or redesigned packaging to disguise smaller quantities. But consumers are catching on. Social media has played a huge role in exposing shrinkflation. Viral posts, TikTok videos, and Reddit discussions are calling out brands for their deceptive practices, making it harder for companies to quietly reduce product sizes. Some companies have even been forced to respond publicly. But that hasn't stopped consumer frustration. More shoppers are now paying closer attention to unit prices instead of just the overall price. Grocery stores list the cost per ounce, pound, or gram on the shelf, and many people are using this information to find better deals. Some have switched to store brands, which often provide better value. Others are buying in bulk at warehouse stores to get more product for their money. Some customers are also taking their complaints directly to brands by leaving negative reviews or contacting customer service. While it's unlikely that companies will reverse shrinkflation anytime soon, growing consumer awareness is putting pressure on them to be more transparent. Shrinkflation may feel unfair, but technically it isn't illegal. As long as companies accurately list the product size on the packaging, they aren't breaking any laws. However, with so many consumers feeling deceived, some are questioning whether regulations should be introduced. Consumer advocacy groups argue that companies should be required to clearly label when a product has shrunk. Some lawmakers have even proposed regulations that would force companies to disclose size reductions on their packaging. Countries like France and Japan have already taken action. In France, some grocery stores now display warning labels on shelves when a product has been downsized. In Japan, manufacturers must be upfront about quantity changes. In the US and UK, however, no such laws exist. Ethically, many argue that shrinkflation is just as bad as raising prices, if not worse. While a price increase is obvious, shrinkflation deceives consumers into thinking they're getting the same value when they aren't. Shrinkflation isn't going away. As long as companies can quietly reduce product sizes while keeping prices the same, they will. But consumers aren't powerless. By checking product sizes, comparing unit prices, and calling out deceptive practices, shoppers can fight back. Social media has already played a huge role in exposing shrinkflation, and the more people speak out, the harder it becomes for companies to get away with it. So next time you grab your favorite snack or household item, take a second to check the label. It might not be the deal you think it is, and now you'll know exactly why.